just to enable us be together with those that were not with us yesterday, I'm going to request the ED to give us a recap of what we covered yesterday.
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies. Good morning, everyone. And I want to believe that for those that were not with us yesterday, you missed, I think, what was a great day in terms of really setting the scene for the summit. But nonetheless, we hope that this reflection will help you come to speed with the deliberations of yesterday. So this is not going to be a PowerPoint presentation, and many thanks to the rapporteurs for the great work that they did. So the day basically started with setting the scene and being reminded by the keynote address. As KAZA, we are part of SADC, very important to reflect on the greater regional integration efforts, which actually go back in time to the early 80s, during the formation of the SADCC. And just to put in context, I think I was in grade 2 in 1980. So it's been a long journey, and the journey is continuing. Director FNR, Mr. Gove, reminded us of the policy framework within which TFCAs and KAZA exist, the critical function of TFCAs, especially in driving regional integration through including infrastructure development, and also the link between conservation and poverty eradication. Specifically made this remark, we also want to eat and survive. He also spoke of the contribution of TFCAs towards mitigating the climate risk crisis, and partner states were called to consider their ecosystem, biodiversity, and carbon stores. We're talking about forests, and reminded us that SADC also has marine seascapes. So also made the linkages to the national determined contributions and the NAPAs of the respective partner states or member states, and the need to make sure that what they're working on is also linked to the multilateral environmental agreements, UNFCCC, CCBD, and the importance of making sure that then this becomes regionalized and also brought down to the country level or domesticated as such. TFCAs are also critical in the provision of goods and services for the rural poor, more than 100 million rural poor in the SADC region. And we were also reminded that TFCAs are our past, our present, and future, representing our culture, our life, our survival, and our livelihoods and dreams. There were a number of reflections during panel 1, being signatories to various multilateral environmental agreements. Setting up TFCAs becomes a logical step to realizing our national obligations to these various multilateral environmental agreements. Botswana have been pioneers of TFCAs, setting up the KTP with South Africa 25 years ago. Governments must take the lead on these transboundary initiatives, and we're reminded of the precursor to KAZA, the OZIT, which was led by the private sector and NGOs. Political will, willingness to collaborate, and partners have brought us this far. And intense stakeholder mapping from the earliest days in the countries to engagement in the process of developing and signing the treaty and the IDPs. Then we also had the opportunity to listen to the role of PPF and the value that they've brought to KAZA and continue to bring to other TFCs in the landscape. And I often talk about the convergence of missions to summarize the relationship between Peace Parks Foundation and the SADC region. In panel 2, there was a presentation in terms of delivery against key performance areas and the great strides that have been made in the various KPAs. And very important, probably this was not made explicit, the key performance areas that were presented and deliberated are actually part of the SADC M&E2, the SADC TFCA key performance assessment. So they were not from without. They are part of the regional integration efforts. All TFCAs are expected to actually reflect on how they are doing using that SADC tool. So we spoke about joint planning at protected areas levels to ensure alignment, country level IDPs, and we also learned of the processes that have gone in terms of updating at transboundary level, focusing on WDAs or wildlife dispersal areas at the regional level in terms of the Master Integrated Development Plan, as well as at species level, and the need for thematic focus. Institutional arrangements were discussed, and we learned of the robust structures in place that are functional, and I think mixed results insofar as the operationalization of national committees, which are a clear or explicit structure provided for in the KAZA Treaty. We also got an indication regarding Zambia on this one, replications of what KAZA is doing elsewhere. The financial sustainability and partner states are contributing to the KAZA fund, anchor support from the German government, and also partnerships in assistance in terms of raising funds. And there was an indication given to set the scene that we will hear more about innovative sustainable financing today. We also heard from Namibia, the long-term park sustainable financing work that's been going on in terms of the strategy and funding support to CBNRM activities. We heard quite a lot in terms of policy harmonization, particularly around wildlife corridors that have been identified and are being recognized in various in-country and transboundary planning processes and documents, the close fishing season, the Kwanduli Nyanti Chobe River Code of Conduct. And then we also had some reflections from Botswana on the visible change on the ground, the KAZA Uni visa, and the various issues, around how it has worked, its history, and then that this is hopefully something that is going to be addressed by the honorable ministers, the issues surrounding the KAZA Uni visa. We also learned of the business development aspects related to Anagero in terms of Angola and setting up the work that they're doing in the Kavango in ecotourism, agriculture, and other areas. The ease of movement as an aspiration and the actions around that, as well as infrastructure development and investment in border posts, upgrading airports and the bridges, and their contribution to the key performance area on business. Suffice to mention that this was all preceded by a very high
recording in progress.
A very high level summary of the State of KAZA report. And I have to mention here that the State of KAZA report was for the period 2006 to 2019, but you might have picked a glitch in the video recording as it talked of 2024. We apologize for that. It was just last minute glitch we could not fix. Then another session was really the voices from the partners and the partner states. So voices of KAZA, your thoughts on what is working and isn't working along key thematic areas as identified in the Master Integrated Development Plan. Just a high-level indication. Not everything really was, for this purpose, it's just a high-level indication. We spoke about natural resources management, forests, water, and fire, a need for more attention within KAZA. And I think in that respect, we're also reminded of the need for data on other species other than key flagship ones, especially elephants and carnivores, the issues of fences, the management of livestock and wildlife interface, and suffice to mention that today you hear about some of the high-level findings of the KAZA Elephant Survey as it relates to the population of livestock and wildlife in the landscape, amongst other things. And then, of course, very importantly, also we discussed community livelihood improvement, the benefits and the need to start accruing at household level. That point was made very strongly, and related to that, during the course of the day, there was mention of the livelihood diversification strategy that's been developed with the support of USAID, and also a linked climate risk assessment, which the senior officials have approved and are waiting, have endorsed for approval by the ministers. So we anticipate that these two documents, which will be quite transformative insofar as delivering on the community livelihood component is concerned, should be approved by the honorable ministers at their next sitting. We also heard about the need to ensure that planning processes enable community participation, not just consultation. And I think even at the end of the day, the chair reflected on the statement by Kosi Mweza of Kasane, who said, plan with us, don't plan without us. I can't remember the exact phrase, but really planning with the communities. Then there was also, of course, deliberation on the land use planning. Some of the issues touched on included conservation connectivity must be embedded in development and area management plans, and quite some emphasis given to the need to align with the local government authorities and other land use planners. More integration required between sectors in planning, locally and transboundary. And related to that, I would want to submit the important role of the national committees in terms of providing country oversight and coordination at a cross-sectoral level. We also heard that strategic environmental assessment are an important tool that can be used much more. And not necessarily in this section, but we also heard of the work that is underway in terms of SEA for the Kwandu Wildlife Dispersal Area. We also discussed tourism development, the UniVisa concerns and the need for practical interventions to ease tourist movement and enhance visitor experience, and then the need for the UniVisa to be extended to the other partner states. Of course, there was deliberation around infrastructure and emphasis made on quality infrastructure, that there is need for good quality infrastructure. Connectivity for infrastructure to facilitate tourism must increase across the region. There were some general cross-cutting issues. Human wildlife needs to stand on its own. Several groups felt that. Perhaps I should pause here, senior officials and delegates, just to mention that at the wildlife dispersal area priority process, human-wildlife conflict actually has been isolated and made a focus area. in terms of interventions, just for your appreciation. So for example, the ongoing phase 3 projects funded with German government support, that is a priority area because it came out during the planning for these 3 priority WDAs that have received this support. Then there was, of course, a very explicit statement on corruption needing to be addressed, and also the need for implementation, scaling up, expediting, and ensuring that documents just don't get the dust. But again, I want to pause here and say this, senior officials and delegates, that it's not just documents for KAZA. These documents are a very important harmonization tool. Without those documents, then we risk having a lot of deviation, fragmentation in approach. So yes, this point is very important in terms of really ensuring that implementation is done and expanded. Impact of investments and projects need to be tracked and documented. And we are appealing here, if I may take advantage of this opportunity, we have the KAZA impact monitoring system, which has limited input from the partner states, and it continues to lag. More transparency of use of funds raised under KAZA umbrella down to community level, and the imperative to include other development sector partners in KAZA processes. As I conclude this summary overview of what happened yesterday, allow me to just mention that we also heard that connectivity should not just be about wildlife. It is also very much about the movement of people. I think, if not mistaken, it's Executive Director Ngitila who made this point, ease of movement of people, quickening and ensuring that there is efficiency at the borders. And also what the risk of not having visitors or tourists coming back to the landscape as a result of some of the negative experiences, such as delays at the borders. How can this be addressed? Then there was also something that came up quite strongly across during the course of the day, and this relates to financial sustainability, the need to look at different options available and possible. We heard of the importance of really leveraging emerging opportunities in the financial markets, for example. We need to be looking at things like nature-based solutions and sinking funds, and the likes. Also, the point was made on inclusiveness to mean involvement of other sectors. This point also came out quite strongly. And so that pretty much sums up what was deliberated yesterday. And with your permission, senior officials, allow me, unless there's a violent objection, allow me, Chair, to just move to the next component so that I speak to the next agenda item. But maybe before I do that, just to check if there is any major omission from yesterday's deliberations. Well, it looks like there is none. So, Director of Programs, I think we're good to go. With your permission and through the chair, if I can just have that recall of the Kasane Elephant Summit communique, because we're now moving into the next session for the day. And this session, Chair, delegates, is basically going to speak to, rather to help everybody present to recall what was presented, rather the communique of the Kasane Elephant Summit. And I'll just basically mention that everything is on the screen. We didn't want to do a PowerPoint presentation for this, for purposes of being absolutely clear and not leaving anything out. So as you can see, this summit took place in Kasane on the 7th of May 2019, under the given theme, towards a common vision for the management of our elephants. This was a very well-attended summit, thanks to the government of the Republic of Botswana. We had representation from all the KAZA partner states, and actually also the focus was basically a reflection on the status of the African elephants in the KAZA TFCA. If we can go down, please. Yeah, I just want to come to that section, and this will be distributed. I want to come to the section, if you can go further down, to the section that is talking to the key things that needed to be done. Thank you. The resolutions, if we can pause there. Number one was the need to conduct a transboundary coordinated and synchronized KAZA-wide aerial survey, and other wildlife populations, of course, according to standardized methodologies to allow comparability across the KAZA TFCA landscape. The need to harmonize the management of elephants as much as possible while taking into account national peculiarities and priorities. Providing for integrated land use planning and harmonization of land use policies at KAZA level, and providing incentives for communities to continue tolerating and coexisting with elephants, ensuring that the management of elephants is adaptive, and standardized approaches to stockpile management. If you can go down further. Improving regional collaboration on wildlife crime through implementation of the Southern Africa Development Community Law Enforcement Anti-Poaching Strategy, engaging transit and destination countries to address issues of demand reduction for illegal ivory, and also effectively engaging international community on matters related to elephant conservation management, including lobbying for support for proposals submitted by KAZA member states to CITES COP18 at the time. And senior officials, delegates, that was a summary of the Kasane communique. You can download it on the Kasane Elephant Summit. You can download this communique from the KAZA website, and I think we'll endeavor to share. Well, maybe allow me to just encourage everybody. That's when we're going to improve traffic to our website. So if you can visit our website and download. But I think at this moment, as agreed with the Director of Programs, to avoid a lot of traffic, if I can invite Dr. Taulo, who was very instrumental in coordinating, organizing, and drafting of the communique, working with the other partner states to come and moderate this session. And also to join him, the panelists that he will invite once he's taken the stage. I thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I trust we all had a restful night. My name, as Dr. Nyambe has indicated, is Cyril Taulo. I am with the Ministry of Environment in Botswana. I have the honor to moderate this particular session, And I believe it's a very important session in the sense that we're actually talking about implementation of the directives that were given to us by our heads of state in 2019. So this is an opportunity to reflect on progress achieved and also see where where gaps still exist in terms of implementation of our collective desire in terms of the management and conservation of our elephants. I will call to the stage our esteemed panelists. We have Mr. Darren Potgieter. Darren is the KAZA aerial survey coordinator, and I'm sure we will have an opportunity to get reflections from Darren on this very important work. Darren, please. Thank you. Can I also call to the floor Mr. Takundine Simpamba, the principal ecologist here in Zambia. And then we will also have Dr. Anna Songhurst. Anna is with EcoExists, an NGO that is based in Botswana. Please join us, Anna. We also have Ms. Ellie Hamunyela. Ellie is the Director of Scientific Services in the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Tourism, Namibia. And finally, we have Professor Edson Gandiwa, the Director of Scientific Services in Zimbabwe. Welcome, Edson. Thank you. In terms of setting the scene for this particular panel discussion, I know we have gone through the communique, but I think it's important to give a brief background on what we are doing with regard to elephants here within the KAZA region. I think we are all fully aware that the KAZA region is home to the largest elephant population, and given that we do have this large population, this comes along with a lot of opportunities and challenges, and we'll hear about them this morning. As has been indicated, the KAZA summit was held about a year ago today as a result of the call by His Excellency Dr. Mokgweetsi Eric Masisi, the President of the Republic of Botswana, in response to the escalating challenges confronting elephant conservation and management. The theme of the summit was towards a common vision for the management of Southern African elephants, interventions to address the challenges posed. We are aware that elephants roam across the KAZA landscape, with many of these magnificent animals found outside our protected areas. The fact that we have these elephants outside our protected areas comes along with the challenges of human-wildlife conflict. And of course, this conflict has been exacerbated by climate change, as we are confronted by more frequent droughts, as we are currently experiencing at the moment. There are concerns about the impact that our large elephant population is having on our biodiversity in protected areas such as the Chobe National Park and others. There's also serious concern about the illegal upsurge in illegal offtake of elephants on the African continent, and our part of the continent has not been spared. We are also fully aware of that elephants have been for the longest time a subject of very, very keen discussion in international fora such as CITES, and we are aware of the debates that continue to rage around the issues related to the trade in ivory. As a region, we are of course concerned that the debate around ivory is extremely polarized and does not allow us an opportunity to really get to the bottom of how we can truly ensure that we benefit from our elephant resources. We are also convinced that this debate ignores the plight of rural communities who bear the brunt of living with elephants. So, ladies and gentlemen, as a starting point, I'll begin with you, Darren. One of the major commitments that emerged from the Elephant Summit was to undertake a transboundary, coordinated, and synchronized count of our elephants and other large mammals in KAZA. Could you please give us the highlights from the survey that you undertook and the implications for policy and management?
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Talo. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to briefly reintroduce myself again. Darren Potgieter from Wild Sense, and I was selected to coordinate the KAZA Elephant Survey in 2022, working under the auspices of the KAZA Secretariat. So the KAZA area, as we've just mentioned, is an enormous 520,000 square kilometer transfrontier conservation area, which is roughly the size of France, and it's a very important home to diverse ecosystems and wildlife, but as mentioned, more than half of Africa's savanna elephant population. And the aerial survey that was conducted was unprecedented in its scale, but importantly, it was the first time that this elephant meter population was surveyed in one fell swoop. The aerial survey had a synchronized, coordinated, and standardized approach so that the data that was collected was scientifically rigorous and credible, and that centralized coordination under the KAZA Secretariat brought together expertise from the 5 partner states, but also internationally. And the key findings are that the KAZA elephant population, estimated at 227,900 elephants, is generally stable when compared with former results. The aerial survey also found a high carcass ratio, which is indicative of high levels of mortality, which warrants further investigation. And very importantly, apart from elephants, the aerial survey estimated the abundance and distribution of other large herbivores, so all large wildlife, but also livestock, and has provided some very key insights into the distribution and density of wildlife, livestock, and also human settlements and people. And all of that information is key to informing policy and management strategies. Overall, the survey was very well conducted, and importantly, I think it's a testament to the very strong collaboration between the partner states, but at the same time, it highlights the importance of continued cooperation between the partner states in harmonizing management policies to manage a keystone species like elephants as one meter population.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Darren, for that brief on the elephant survey. I think we'll then quickly move on to the partner states here within KAZA. Takundine, could you please give us a flavor of what you went through as partner states in terms of organizing and executing this very, very important and massive undertaking?
Maybe just let me intervene a bit. I see, looks like they are struggling to speak to the microphones. So I don't know, if you're not comfortable, I can give my microphone. Or if you can speak to that one, it's fine.
Thank you, Bwana Moderator, and good morning to everyone. So I think I'll speak to the theme of the role of partner states in the execution of the KAZA Elephant Survey. So to provide a brief overview of the role of partner states in the execution of the KAZA Elephant Survey, I think I'll subdivide it into 3 sub-themes. There was the planning phase, then we also had the survey implementation phase, and finally we also had the data analysis phase. So with the planning phase, there were a number of roles that were carried out by the staff of the partner states. Firstly, the partner states internally had to identify staff from the wildlife agencies based on a criteria. One of the criteria was that these members of staff should have participated in previous area surveys, and this was considering the fact that the KAZA Elephant Survey was a major survey and was also at a large scale, so we needed experienced staff from the various countries. Then secondly, the partner states also played a role when it comes to the issue of logistics. They worked hand in hand with the KAZA Elephant Survey Coordinator, who is seated next to me on my left, in identifying the airstrips and also accommodation facilities which have been previously used on previous aerial surveys. So this was ideal in order to reduce fatigue and also to maximize on the efficiency of the various staff. Then thirdly, partner states also played a role in country and also on a regional level when it comes to the identification of aircraft providers. One thing that we have to realize is that for aerial surveys, it's not just any aircraft that can be used. You need a specific aircraft with certain requirements. For instance, it needs to have a radar altimeter, and it also needs to have fixed wing struts. So those are critical components that are required. So in country and also on a regional level, partner states also identified those companies and shared them with the KAZA Elephant Coordinator, and also further collaborated on the selection of those aircraft providers. Then the fourth point that I also wish to mention is that we also had to identify various equipment that was used on the KAZA Elephant Survey. And again, the partner states, through the various staff from the wildlife agencies, worked with back to base just to check if anything had been missed. Then the fifth point, when it comes to the planning phase, partner states also played a role when it came to the design of the aerial survey. And this was done through the provision of aerial survey reports, which enabled the comparison of densities on previous surveys. So in the end, when all this data was provided, the staff from the wildlife agencies also worked with the KAZA Elephant Coordinator to design the survey for the KAZA Elephant Survey. Then the other point that was also critical was that there was also need to get authorities and also permissions from the various civil aviation authorities in country. This is required, as you can't conduct an aerial survey without getting permission from the civil aviation authorities. So partner states had to provide either letters of recommendation or actually request themselves to civil aviation authorities and also the various agencies within countries. Then I would also like to just comment also on the survey implementation phase, which was the second phase. During that phase, the partner states availed all the staff that had been initially provided. I wish to mention that these staff from the wildlife agencies were trained at Kasani in July in preparation for the elephant survey, so that they would operate at the same level and also follow the same protocols. So the staff played various roles. For instance, some were area seat observers, then others were front seat observers, and then others were ground coordinators, just assisting. Then the other role that partner states played is that permission is normally required to cross from one country to the other. You can't just leave. So the governments had to grant that authority. So that was also critical, and it was granted in time so that the KAZA elephant survey would start at the right time. Then the last point that I would also like to mention under the survey implementation phase was that staff were responsible for data entry. They also stored the data, and there was also provision of daily updates to the central command center, which was based at Kasani, Department of Wildlife and National Parks in Botswana. Then the last phase that I'm going to talk about is the data analysis phase. For this phase, the partner states did identify also staff that were based on the ground, and these members of staff played a role when it came to counter-checking the data, which had initially been entered, and they also played a role in the analysis of the data. This was done jointly with the KAZA elephant survey coordinator. Then lastly, I think I need to mention is that the partner states, through staff from the various wildlife agencies, also reviewed the report. Several drafts were sent through, and the partner states played a role in the review of those reports before they were finally accepted, and with the eventual launch of the report last year. So I would like to just state that the partner states really played a critical role in provision of staff, and through this coordination, it was possible for the first ever synchronized aerial survey of elephants to take place in the KAZA TFC. I think I'll end here for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ndine, for that brief on how we actually got to the stage where we were able to undertake the survey. I think now we'll move on to Anna. Anna, we hear a lot about the need to give elephants space to roam across the KAZA landscape. And of course, this is important to allow us to relieve pressure in areas where we find a lot of elephants, such as Botswana, and also here in Zimbabwe. But I think it's important for us to understand, what the key messages are with regard to policy and decision makers on the subject of elephant movements and connectivity in KAZA. I think it would be useful to get your thoughts as an elephant researcher with a lot of experience in the area of human conflict research, and get your perspectives. Over to you, Anna.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Talo. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. So I'm going to set a bit of context to what I'm going to talk about now. So after the KAZA Elephant Summit in 2019, when the KAZA Strategic Planning Framework for the Conservation and Management of Elephants in the KAZA TFCA was endorsed, there was like a series of meetings and discussions that took place between different practitioners from the 5 partner countries, both from government and NGOs, and it was realized that there was a need for a sub-working group which focused on elephants within the KAZA landscape. And in 2022, the KAZA Secretariat facilitated the establishment of that sub-working group, which now sits under the Conservation Working Group within the KAZA structure. And the working group is guided by the strategic planning framework, which has outlined a number of key objectives and actions needed for the management and conservation of elephants in the region. And objective 2 of that framework actually is to maintain and manage KAZA's elephants as one contiguous population. And it's recognized that the long-term viability and effective management of KAZA's elephants as a transboundary metapopulation depends upon maintaining landscape connectivity. And there were a number of actions that came out of that objective that were identified as needed, one of them being the KAZA-wide survey, which my colleagues have spoken about, and another one was the need to really understand the movements and current connectivity of elephants across the landscape as well. So then the working group started to develop data sharing protocols and agreements to enable data sharing, because that's key if you're going to conduct this transboundary type of research in the landscape. And then the 5 partner countries and 10 NGOs from across the KAZA region contributed elephant movement data, and we ended up with a data set of coming from 291 elephants that had been collared. I think that equaled about 3.9 million GPS observations. So it was a huge data set, a really valuable data set that enabled a lot of analysis to be done. And from that, we were then able to see, kind of use that data to look at what the distribution and the intensity of use of elephants were across the landscape, and that helped to advise the planning of the survey. We were also then able to see where there were current transboundary movements for both females and male elephants, and also where sometimes it's just male elephants which are crossing the borders. Most of those occurred within the identified wildlife dispersal areas and some outside, because this is now kind of more current information. And then it also enabled us to look at more kind of detailed movements where elephants are moving through kind of human modified landscapes, where they're trying to access different resources, whether it be water or essential resources. And these, so these micro corridors, these smaller kind of movement routes were identified across the landscape. And these micro corridors came out to be critical for the functioning of the wildlife dispersal areas and that movement for elephants and connectivity. And then we were also able to model, so to use predictive modeling to look at what future kind of connectivity and movement routes might look like in the landscape as well. And not only did we manage to identify where there is existing connectivity, but it also enabled us to see where there are threats, threats to this connectivity. And some key threats were identified, which include things like physical barriers, so where we've got some areas where there's fences or roads which are inhibiting the movement of elephants across the landscape, also where there's human-elephant conflict hotspots, poaching hotspots, both of which influence the movements of elephants, and also obviously where there's land use change or developments which are affecting connectivity. And so a number of recommendations came out, and all this work was put into a policy brief which was released last year in 2023. I'm not going to go into all the recommendations that came out of that work, but I did want to highlight maybe just a few. For example, there's a key need to help address these barriers to connectivity. So really looking at where some of these physical barriers are, where there might be some fences that are inhibiting connectivity. Maybe there's a chance to remove some of those to create more free movement. Also in areas where there's key hotspot areas for human-elephant conflict, to make sure interventions are focused on those, and that these micro corridors are incorporated into things like land use planning, so that can help to alleviate conflict and help to increase connectivity. And that obviously when you have these micro corridors going through areas where people are living, that it's essential that the local people are involved in identifying those corridors, and that was identified as a critical need, and especially also in the planning of how to maintain those corridors into the future. Also, it was identified that there's a real need for more signage and awareness raising on corridors across the whole landscape to help improve safety for people. And that it would be good to, especially, the discussions that will take place later today, thinking about how to leverage these corridors and see how they can be incorporated into nature-based solutions. Maybe there's a way that people can start to benefit from having these corridors in the landscape because they're providing an ecological service for KAZA. And then obviously policy level, it's important that these kind of corridors are incorporated and enabled in the policies that we have and that they're recognized. I think I just wanted to maybe end by saying that, securing and connecting or reconnecting wildlife corridors and other high-value locations is critical to facilitate the movement of elephants from densely populated areas to areas with greatly reduced numbers, and this will help to reduce human-elephant conflict in some areas. And that this policy brief is available on the KAZA website, so I'd encourage you to try and download that, because it has more detailed information and recommendations that have come from a whole collaboration of experts across the landscape, and it's available in both English and Portuguese.
Thank you, Anna. That was very useful information. I think now we will move on to the issues around sustainable use or sustainable utilization and international trade. Ellie, let us now talk about the elephant in the room. I know you've had extensive experience working with or through or as part of representing Namibia at CITES. And more and more frequently we are hearing that CITES is not working for us as a Southern African region. We are fully aware that elephants are a very important resource for us, but we are increasingly constrained by restrictions on international trade from fully benefiting from our elephants. Please give us your reflections on the CITES Convention and the implications for KAZA TFCA partner states.
Thank you very much, moderator, and good morning to you all. Most of the faces in this room are very familiar, and I can confidently say that most of you know the basics of CITES, you have that understanding, but probably there are 2 or 3 persons who do not know the basics of CITES. And allow me, just in the interest of those who are not well acquainted with CITES, just to give a very, very brief introduction to what CITES is. CITES is a convention on international trade in endangered species of wild fauna and flora, so it includes both plants and animals. The aim of the convention, that's the original aim, is to regulate trade in those species which are listed on CITES appendices. So the level of protection is based on the CITES appendices, and there are 3 appendices in CITES. Appendix 1 contains species, of course both animals and plants, which are threatened with international trade, and therefore commercial trade is not allowed in those species. Appendix 2, it contains species which are not necessarily threatened with extinction, but trade in them need to be regulated to ensure that trade is sustainable and therefore not detrimental to the survival of those species in the wild. And then we have our last appendix, which is 3, which is really not relevant to our discussion today, but to complete the introduction, Appendix 3 contains species which are protected in at least one country, and that specific country has then asked other countries to try and control and regulate trade in that species. I think that's enough as an introduction. Coming back now to the KAZA elephant populations, we have 2 populations which are listed on Appendix 1. That's the Zambian population and the Angolan population. And then the other 3 populations, that's the Namibian, Botswana, and the Zimbabwean populations are listed on Appendix 2. But it's a special Appendix 2 listing. We're not just controlling trade, but there are a lot of restrictions which are placed on these populations. As I said, it's a special listing. We have some species which we can trade in as Appendix 2 specimens, and there are also some specimens which should be traded in as Appendix 1. For example, hunting trophies, elephant hide and leather products, and also live trade in live elephants. That's on Appendix 2. But when we come to trade in raw ivory, that is then regarded as a specimen in Appendix 1. So we're not allowed to freely trade commercially in raw ivory.
Ellie, I understand our interpreters are having challenges with the roving mic. If you could use the mic next to you.
Is that better? So should I start all over or should I just continue? To use both?
I think there will be interference if you try to use both. If you could just use the one next to you to avoid. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Is it better now? Can I continue? Okay, thank you. You know, in my view, except the population of Angola, probably, which is on Appendix 1, maybe that's correctly placed. But all other populations for the 4 partner states are not correctly placed on the CITES appendices. These populations are not, they are not small. They are not also fragmented, and international trade is not a threat to these populations as we are regulating international trade. The Angolan population, the reason why I'm saying it's maybe fitting in Appendix 1 is because it's still recovering, and that is why I'm making that statement. But all others, I feel that trade restrictions which are imposed on those populations are not justified. They cannot be justified. Last time we sold raw ivory was in 2008. That, I think, was about 16 years ago. And we have heard from Darren that half of the global African elephant population, the savanna, of course, is found in the KAZA landscape. So every day, these elephants are dying. We are collecting ivory from natural mortalities. We are also collecting ivory from management practices because of elephant-human conflict, some of the elephants, they get destroyed as problem animals. So we are accumulating raw ivory every day. And because we cannot sell that raw ivory, we are forced to stockpile. And stockpiling ivory is not an easy exercise. We spend quite a lot of money to secure the strong room where we are keeping this raw ivory. It's an enormous amount we spend there, which could have been diverted to conservation. But now we are spending that money to make sure that we secure our stockpiles. Some partner states here, they've invested even in technology, such as alarm systems and also security cameras. And, some of them are also using police officers and security officers to make sure that they have secured their strong rooms. And then on top of that also, we also have our communities which are living with these elephants. Elephants in KAZA, maybe somewhere else, but in KAZA I can confidently say that they don't know boundaries of national parks at all. They move around, they go in communities, and as a result, our local communities have to coexist with these elephants. And at the moment, without selling the stockpile, we cannot give our local communities the incentives they deserve to coexist with these elephants. They now see our elephants as liabilities because they go in there, they cause destructions of water infrastructure, their houses, their gardens, and we even lose human lives because of that conflict. So we have to change the narrative for our local communities to see our elephants as assets which can generate tangible benefits for them so that they can live with these animals. Not only that they can live with them, but as I said, these elephants are living with our local communities. Our local community should also be able to protect these elephants from poachers. But if our communities are not seeing, but nowadays, for maybe the last conference of the parties, we have been talking of closing those ivory domestic markets without no reasons. And the parties are saying, whether those markets are regulated or not, that's not the issue. Let's just close down those markets because they are the source of illegal trade. And we are not convinced that that is the case. If the market is well regulated, like the Zimbabwean one, Zimbabwe is generating funds from that for conservation purposes and also for community development programs. And we therefore feel that that restriction will not be, it's not a restriction which is justified. We feel Zimbabwe should be allowed to sell or to sell ivory on the domestic market. We also feel that the issue of the domestic market is not in the domain of CITES, because CITES should focus actually on international trade and not on domestic trade. The other issue again, sorry, I have to give the example of Zimbabwe again, is the sale of hides and elephant leather goods for commercial purposes. During the last conference of the parties, Zimbabwe went with a proposal to be given permission to trade in elephant hides and leather products for commercial purposes. And that was denied. It was denied. But Zimbabwe already is collecting these hides from natural mortalities, from animals they are destroying as elephant problems. So there's no justification as to why Zimbabwe should not be given that opportunity, but it was denied. The issue of trade restriction does not only impact on social and economic, it also impacts on biodiversity conservation, as my moderator said earlier. Our elephant populations are so big, and we are not, even we can argue that no, but if your populations are that big, why are you not culling? Although culling is not in the domain of CITES, if we cull, it will be a public outcry. And also, what will you do with the products? If you collect ivory from there, you collect elephant hide, what will you do with those products if you are not allowed to sell them even? So it's really a difficult situation we're in. This topic is very provocative. I can sit here the whole day talking about it, but I think in the interest of time, I must end here. But let me leave us, me included, of course, with some questions. If we are saying CITES is not serving us, why are we still parties to the CITES Convention? Should we maybe pull out of the CITES Convention? The second question is, if we leave the CITES Convention, will we be able to trade in our raw ivory? Are there any importing states, because we are not consumer states, are there any importing states which will be willing to take our ivory outside the CITES regime? The other question is also that if we leave CITES, will we be able to trade in our other specimens, like for example, the elephant trophies? Because we're also making some funds from the elephant trophies, which we are exporting to Europe and the United States. Will the United States and the European countries want to trade with parties which are not, with countries which are not parties to CITES? So those are the questions we need to ask ourselves, and then we take a decisive decision. With that, moderator, thank you very much for the floor.
Thank you for that very thought-provoking intervention, Ellie. I'm sure our audience will want to deliberate on the questions that you have just raised. But now moving on to the issues of climate change. Edson, we are aware that climate change is threatening food and water security in our region. Could you tell us how we could manage elephants under changing climate in these semi-arid landscapes? And could you also give us a flavor of what the lessons are from Zimbabwe and the KAZA TFCA?
Thank you so much, moderator. Let me also say good morning to the distinguished guests. Thank you very much for the very interesting question. Issues of climate change are topical these days. And in this discussion, I will just point on 5 issues or 5 points. The first is just to say, when we talk about climate change, all the scenarios, climate change modeling scenarios, point to Southern Africa going dry as we proceed in the future, but also the temperatures will be warming up, which means when we discuss elephant conservation and broadly even wildlife conservation, We know in these savanna ecosystems, most of our systems are bottom-up controlled. That means the role of moisture is very, very critical. But what we also see is that the rainfall pattern is changing. In some instances, the long-term annual rainfall may remain stable, but all the rain come in a few days of a season, which also affects the growing pattern and which affects the forage resources for our herbivores, particularly elephants in this case. But the second point I want to raise, moderator, is that when we look at the changing climate, it's also compounded by the fact that the environment where we find our species is also changing. Here, I mean, it's human-dominated. I think from the aerial survey, we also saw the spread of our encroachment in terms of our communities. But also the human population is growing. I think this was clearly articulated yesterday. More importantly, we are also seeing the reduction in terms of the habitats outside of the core protected areas due to expansion of the settlements, but also the fields that we have. In many scenarios, some of our core protected areas are becoming ecological islands. And all this compounds the fact that we want to manage a species such as an elephant, which needs large territories in terms of habitats, but more importantly, in terms of its resource use. The third element I want to bring is that now on the elephant, the African savanna elephant, which I will focus on, which we have mostly in the 5 KAZA partner states, but also we know Angola as the forest elephant. I would want to quote a very interesting article published by one ecologist, famous ecologist, also ornithologist, Peter Mandi, who is now late from Zimbabwe. Peter Mandi in 2006 published a very interesting article on the African elephant, something to cherish, but also to use. And in that article, he points to the fact that the African elephant is a very wonderful animal, but also a problem to the environment and to the local people. Particularly when the elephant density reaches 0.5 elephants per square kilometer, mostly we get to the point of the elephant problem. So here we are saying the climate is changing and we are getting drier, and more interestingly, the issues of habitats are also being constrained. What does that impact, or what does that mean to managing the species in the KAZA landscape? So on the Zimbabwean landscape, we have been very much meticulous, but also borrowing from all these regional intervention from SADC, but also from the intervention of the African Elephant Action Plan, which has been recently revised. In that African Elephant Action Plan, there are priorities which we also have adopted in our own National Elephant Management Plan, currently running from 2021 to 2025, but over the years we have been able to have a plan which helps us manage our elephant population in Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, we utilize, which will be my fourth point, we utilize the aspect of adaptive management. So whatever we do, we make sure that science informs our management actions. In that plan, we have 5 thematic areas which touches on the species biological aspects in terms of ecosystem management. We also touch the issues of how we want to protect the resource in terms of law enforcement. We touch the issues that relates to the social relations and even the issues of collaboration with our partners and how we fund that management plan. So using that plan, we have 4 main regions of managing elephants in Zimbabwe. 2 of them lie within the KAZA landscape. That is the Sebungwe and the Northwest Matabeleland. We have regional committees. So we have devolved the issue of elephant management so that it's inclusive. And whilst we have those regional committees for these 2 regions within Zimbabwe, what's of interest is that we do plan actions that help in terms of ensuring that we are able to extend the range of the elephants. I'm happy that our colleagues from IFO are pushing a program that looks at how do we expand elephant movement, especially with the project that we are collaboratively running together, the Room to Roam initiative. So basically we know that at times when there is less rainfall, elephants may need to expand their range to other areas with key resources, mostly forage. And this has been clearly articulated in this panel discussion. So we need then to be able to ensure that we have core areas that elephant can utilize within the parks, but also outside of the parks. And our government has recently revised the campfire program. In so doing, that helps us to aid the movement of even elephants. If we are able to make them stay longer in the communal areas, that also helps with issues to do with them utilizing the key resources outside of the core areas, which are national parks, your safari areas, and even the conservancies that we have. And whilst we are also there, in terms of the issue about coexistence, because once you have the elephants stay in communal areas, there is need then to also have safeguards for the communities. And I'm happy also to report that the government of Zimbabwe is a way of ensuring that there is the tolerance of elephants and also other wildlife species has also recently approved the Human Wildlife Conflict Relief Fund, which just enables us to be able to ensure that communities have that tolerance of wildlife, and also through the campfire program they get the necessary benefits to be able to sustain their livelihoods. So all these elements and the approaches enable us to be able to adapt to ensure that we secure the core protected areas where we want our elephants to thrive, but also expand their own territories. And we know within KAZA, with the wildlife dispersal areas, we are working very much to be able to plan. We have started a very interesting planning process in the communal area in one of the Matusadona conservation area, where we working with our collaborators, the African Parks, who are working with Zimpax. We are now planning for the communal area to be able to actually safeguard the core habitat for the elephant species. So we need adaptive management, and the role of science cannot be overemphasized, because we need to know how many elephants we do have, how many that can be sustained in a particular habitat patch, but more importantly, where they are. So the results of the elephant, that the KAZA area survey becomes very critical in our planning to ensure that we are able to connect all the critical areas. And the last point, which is the fifth point I want to raise, relates to what can we do at the KAZA landscape level. I talked about the elephant problem. In Hwange, we are sitting with an elephant density of more than 2 elephants per square kilometer. To be precise, about 2.8 elephants per square kilometer. Ideally, we should be having 0.5 elephants. That is what science tells us. Beyond that, we reach these thresholds of potential concern, which relates to us, the habitat, elephants destroying their own habitats. And in many of our areas, particularly in the KAZA landscape, on the Zimbabwean part, we are pumping water, which means climate change will also impact on our surface water provision. And we then need, at KAZA landscape level, to be collaborative in terms of water provision, artificial water provision. Many a time you see animals would die whenever they move from between Zimbabwe and Botswana because of the need for them to access key water resources. So there is need for that planning. Similar harmonized water provision across the two, particularly Zimbabwe and Botswana, but we also know that the animals move to Zambia, and particularly the elephants. The other key element, which is very, very critical, I think the aerial survey is very, very important already. We need to have this consistently carried out so that we are able to move. So we need to push the animals within the KAZA landscape. How are we able to have elephant hotspots in terms of abundance be dispersed beyond the core areas, especially Hwange for our case in Zimbabwe? We are currently working with the Hwange Sanyati biological corridor to move elephants, to be able for them to move from particularly Hwange to also the Sebungwe region. But outside of Zimbabwe, we do need to make sure that connectivity is very, very important. But we know with linear infrastructure, fences, also road development, we need then to be having innovative planning methodologies to be able to make sure that we provide access in terms of the key corridors that our elephants would need to utilize as we plan together within the KAZA landscape. We know, we talk about, perhaps, I think my sister here, Ellie, talked about trade. But many a time, we have landscapes, both the 520,000 square kilometer that our director, executive director talks about. Surely we need now to be clear on how many elephants in those other landscapes. We know Namibia is very good in terms of conservancies. So where else can we push the population to go beyond the protected areas? But more importantly, that would need then to talk about issues of sustainable use. are we able to derive value to the communities for them to have an incentive to keep more elephants outside of our core areas? So these are the issues that we need to also think when we talk about climate change. Because climate change is coming as a stressor to the system. This already, with other factors which are confining the elephants to core areas, we need then to be looking at trade-offs to be able to say we push elephants to communal areas within the KAZA landscape, because we should be able, although it's a mosaic of land uses, as I conclude, the African Elephant Action Plan has put human-wildlife conflict as the top priority. We know now Zimbabwe, we have this relief fund for conflict. We know Botswana, you have something, Namibia as a framework. Perhaps let's also harmonize these things and have lessons so that we are able to move together. But issues of habitat and connectivity, those will become core in terms of the science. But we need then to make sure that as we do the broader benefits to communities, as KAZA, as our executive director talks about, elephants are flagship. They need to be conserved, but conserved in a way that doesn't destroy the same environment, conserved in a way that we share the resource and we share the burden of conserving the species. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that food for thought, Edson. I think there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. I think we have spoken extensively about elephants, about the importance of elephants, but also more importantly, how we can manage this large population. I'm sure we have got questions from the floor, so we will entertain a few. But of course, in the interest of time, can we keep our interventions brief? I see several hands on that other side of the room. And yes, Malan in the back.
Thank you very much for very informative presentations. It's intriguing because sitting between my sisters, the two ladies, and then the gentleman from Zim, you could see there is real conflict in terms of the focus. We see obviously the need for the connection for the elephants to be able to roam in between boundaries and even between if you like communities, the micro connections. As on the other side, we have a real issue with regard to the resources that are available right now in terms of the natural resources, in terms of restrictions that do persist, or that actually are in place in terms of the legal restrictions through impediments, as I think it was described yesterday. So I want to see the common ground, because if we are partners indeed, we should be speaking the same language in terms of how do we ensure that the resources that are available right now are actually used to ensure that you have continued, we have this KAZA, as a viable option, as a viable project for all of us. So I want to see that. I want to see what is happening in between the call for the lifting of these restrictions.
Thank you very much. I think my interest is on the research that was going on. I think I believe that you cannot conserve what we don't know. The numbers tell us a story. So I don't know whether we have done our genomic analysis just to understand the breeding coefficients, the genetic distances between these elephants, because otherwise we'll be conserving something which at the end of the day will have actually maybe limited what you call parameter testing, something like that. So I just wanted to see if you are doing any work in genomics about these elephants. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Just to say, as much as we are talking regional integration, social economic development, and conservation and others, I don't see much where we are talking of security. My advice is that this should go hand in hand. It was also a resolution in Kasane Summit, whereby it was resolved that the SADC anti-poaching strategy should be implemented. I was expecting that from the panelists, because as you look at the program, it's talking of illegal wildlife trade and law enforcement, but it's like it's a drop in the ocean. I haven't had much of it, but the concern from the law enforcement area was that we should be facilitated to follow or to disrupt illegal activities within the KAZA summit, within the KAZA area. To go as far as identifying, say, we might identify or recover a task from, I won't mention the markets that you know. We should be able to say, this is not only an elephant task, but it is a task that is coming from the KAZA area. How far are we going? How is KAZA investing? How much is it investing in securing its product? And lastly, I would maybe, just maybe, going forward, we should have panelists talking to this issue. Thank you, Chair.
I think perhaps we could give the panelists an opportunity to respond to those first three interventions before we entertain more. I think with regard to the first question, where we talk about our common position regarding a lot of the issues that have been raised by the panelists today, I think it's quite clear that we are determined to talk as a KAZA, as SADC, about with one voice when it comes to the issues around elephant conservation and management. But of course, I will allow my panelists. I'm not sure who would want to take that one. Ellie, perhaps I can hand that one to you.
Thank you, moderator. I think we have already responded to that question. Yes, that is the position. We would like to have a common position, not only within KAZA, but also, you know, at the SADC level. We want to have a common position. Of course, we are sovereign states. Some states might have different positions, but overall, we would like to have that common position. Yeah.
Thank you. The second one I'll hand over to Anna. Perhaps you could assist us with that one.
Okay, could I just ask for it to be repeated again so that I could get more clarity? Thanks.
Yeah, I said conservation. Basically, we have to conserve what we know. So my question was that apart from doing the surveys and other studies, are you also doing genomic studies just to understand the breeding coefficients for these elephants in terms of how close are they related, and so that we can know if they are all in similar alleles or they are different from there, so we can determine how far they are between them, so that we can know exactly where we can place them, especially bulls. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I just spoke of one particular piece of collaborative research that was conducted, but there is a proposal to look at more of the genetics of the population across the KAZA landscape, and that can also help to inform us about historic movement and distribution of elephants across the landscape, and then we can see then how it's changed, and then we can see how it might look in the future as well. And then we'd also be able to look at things like that to see if there is any interpopulation exchanges.
So I think basically you can also contact the elephant genome. I think we are looking at Africa. They've got a lot of movement from Ethiopia coming there, but when we check in Zambia and Zimbabwe, and in our KAZA, there's actually blank. So I think we can have something we can put them, we can link them all the way from there. Thank you.
Thank you. We had a question around law enforcement, security, and how we are cooperating within KAZA in this very key aspect. Edson, perhaps you could assist us with that.
Thank you so much, moderator, and thank you very much for the nice question. Just to highlight that in terms of law enforcement, we are very much cooperating. I did indicate that even when we look at the Zimbabwean, but our elephant management plan has a very clear component in terms of resource protection. Perhaps it's deliberate that in this discussion, we're focusing more on the high level part of elephant conservation, but that's one key element across all the partner states where we discuss issues of resource protection. But many times with the issues of ensuring that we integrate, at times this discussion subject doesn't become topical. But also, Chair, whilst I have the floor, I think the issue about the issues of genomics and all that, perhaps even our Executive Director KAZA may highlight later. We are currently developing a research framework and priority areas for KAZA. And that's an area which is topical, and all the universities within the KAZA landscape is identifying the issues about, us genetic profiling, even the issues about law enforcement, the forensics around, samples. So those are areas which are topical and would be very keen to also have all our universities, research institutions playing a part in this regard. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you, Edson. We are running out of time now. I think we'll entertain two more questions. I think we had one from Malan.
So thank you, Cyril. The major question in the room in SADC and maybe the KAZA countries is, why are we still in CITES when it's actively undermining our conservation and community development? So this is not really being addressed enough yet. First of all, estimates are that SADC, and it's mostly the 5 countries here, plus South Africa, sit on $1 billion worth of ivory and rhino horn. 1 billion. If that goes into an endowment fund, it will cover all conservation management costs, all law enforcement, all community development forever. So it's a stranded asset, as the economists would call that. Now, we all know that the status quo in CITES will not change. They've reached the comfort zone, which is an ugly compromise between law and convenient decision-making that satisfy the majority but harms the few. It will not change unless something drastic happens. Now, leaving CITES, these 4 or 5 countries will take half of Africa's savanna elephants out of CITES, but without harming their conservation status because of things like KAZA and the national conservation efforts. But it will create a shockwave in the CITES system, that these policies and processes within CITES are rejected because they undermine conservation, while CITES is meant to do the other way around. I honestly can't think of what else will create the change. The options are down to just that one. We all want to see a normal progression of ideas and support developing and engagement, but I think this is wasting time and resources. You need to take a political action. Leave CITES. Continue to engage as an observer. Continue to trade, because there's a provision on trade with non-parties in the other species. and then negotiate your return to CITES with your elephant populations on Appendix 1 and a very, very clear framework of what a new elephant trade dispensation should look like. And then you bring back half of Africa's elephants into CITES.
Thank you, Malan. I think we'll have just one more.
Yes, yes, we have
Marco.
Good morning, everyone. Marco Pani, and thank you to all the panelists. Like Malan, we shared one thing, that we have been both staff members of the CITES Secretariat in different periods. And what Ellie said is contrasting with what we can see recently on the ground in some KAZA member states. That instead of working on the connectivity with your CBRM, connectivity is linked to other issues which are not CBRM. Campfire was born to conserve biodiversity through the livelihoods of people outside protected area. And like this, and one of the few things, Campfire was African-driven and not donor-driven. And this is also important. So there is some sort of disconnect between the international reality and the reality on the ground. And let's see, for example, about another elephant in the room. We have many. We could have an herd to be sent to Germany, probably. And is hunting. Most of the benefits of the communities, but also to government, over the years came from hunting. And in the region nowadays, we have about nearly 30 to 40 million US dollars only in trophy fees in the KAZA area. So not to speak about voluntary contributions, boreholes, clinics, classrooms, and the rest that hunting has and is continuing to give to this. So on one hand, there is a blockage at the international level on CITES. On the other hand, there is the goose that laid the golden eggs that is under attack and not properly used even to uplift the community benefits. So this sort of conundrum, it needs a proper strategy because it speaks about connectivity, it speaks about habitat conservation, it speaks about livelihoods, law enforcement, and the like. And this is crucial to put this in any international agenda that we have, and especially at this level, because this dream of having 5 countries together in conservation can be maintained if we maintain the current and usual level of benefits deriving from both consumptive and non-consumptive use. Although, in my point of view, all the use is consumptive, because phototourism is consuming more habitat, more water, more sewage, more disturbance to animals that probably hunting is doing. So we need an holistic approach and not to listen too much to the songs of certain arenas coming most likely from East Africa, where the lack of hunting has had a demise of 70% of the wildlife. And this country in East Africa, which is leading a coalition of other countries in CITES, should not dictate the policy also in Southern Africa. And you have the strength, you have the traditions, you have the culture to come up with a proper strategy to continue to conserve this incredible variety of landscape cultures and people that you have here. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we've had a very interactive discussion, stimulated by our very esteemed panelists. I would like to thank them once again for their participation, and I think this, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of this particular session. Thank you for your attention.
Let's just give them another round of applause, please. Thank you very much, sir and panelists. We are really running out of time. Today we have 5 sessions, 3 of which we are supposed to have this morning, and 2 in the afternoon. So I think in the next sessions, I would request that we try to be a bit fast. I know that it's not every time that we meet to discuss these issues, and also just allowing a bit of time for us to discuss these matters to the fullest. We are supposed to have a break at 11, and now it's already 10. So the next sessions, today we'll be discussing managing KAZA TFCA as an integrated transboundary landscape. And then there'll be panelists and experts that will be speaking to that. And then the other session is National Capital and Cultural Heritage as a catalyst for inclusive socio-economic development in the ecoregion. Then we'll also be discussing financial sustainability of KAZA TFCA, where strategic options and considerations have to be made. Then the last session today will be KAZA TFCA as actually looking at where we are. It's KAZA TFCA as a single tourist destination. So without wasting much time, may I invite the next moderator, and that we're now looking at managing KAZA TFCA as an integrated transboundary landscape, and the moderator is Dr. Henry Mwima. He is going to invite the panelists.
Thank you very much, Director of Programs. This session, as the Director of Program indicated, is managing KAZA TFCA as an integrated transboundary landscape. At the end of the session yesterday, we had a brief discussion with the KAZA TFCA Executive Director, and I would just like to borrow one statement that he said. He said that this topic is one of those that is at the heart of KAZA. So we have 3 components for this session. We have the first component, presenter will give a presentation. Second one, we shall have the panel discussion, and then of course the plenary discussion. And mindful of what the Director of Program has said in terms of time, I would not like to spend a lot of time to talk about some of the issues, but to introduce the presenter who is supposed to give a presentation, after which then I will invite the panelists to come and join us. I will also request the presenter to join us after all the panelists have done their presentations. So the presentation is entitled Land Uses and Land Use Planning in KAZA TFCA. And I would like to invite Dr. Mike Knight to come and make a presentation. Dr. Mike.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Henry, and distinguished guests. Bon dia, good morning. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about KAZA and integrated landscape and landscape planning. It's really around breaking barriers and creating connectivity. That's what KAZA is all about. Next slide, please. I'm taking you back to the outputs from the World Economic Forum. And here, if you look at the 10 risks that have been identified, 5 of those 10 risks are environmental. The top 4 are environmental. So everything that we are talking about here resonates with everything that's going around in the Economic Forum, whether it be climate change, critical earth systems changing, biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse, or natural resource shortages. We are facing that in KAZA. In many ways, we are really, really on the money when it comes to that. When it comes to integrated land use planning, we are often tasked with doing this, and we've got this plethora of ideas that are out there, but we really try and have to make it quite simple, to make it understood and usable. Asking questions around land use planning is critical. Why are we planning? Who are we planning for? Are we planning for communities, for governments, or whatever it is, or municipalities? What are you planning? What are you planning to achieve? How are you planning to develop these plans? Is it a bottom-up development of plan, or is it a top-down, or is it a combination of both? Who is planning? And what is the limit? What is the legal mandate for each of those plans? And is there money behind it? And it's my guess that if we had the Minister of Finance in the sector here, or landscape planning involved, they will come out with a completely different plan to what we as environmentalists would actually put on the table. And the reason for that is because they have different values and different objectives. And I think that's why it's critically important, as questions were yesterday, who are the players and the key government players that are not in this forum that should be here, because they really do have the checkbook and the influence, and we have to make sure that they're part and parcel of that planning process. On Friday and Saturday, we had the privilege of meeting in a small group to actually explore this whole idea of the green growth. And the green growth was, and to try and deliver on a coherent strategy for KAZA, land use planning is an important component of that. What we sit in KAZA with is a plethora of plans. SADC giving us policy and direction, right down to how we manage a World Heritage Site in Victoria Falls. We also have the IDPs, which are nationally focused and then consolidated into a KAZA-wide plan. We've also got species plans that inform the space of our planning and work in that landscape, whether it be for wild dogs, elephants, and other things that are in the landscape. And at the same time, we've also got some strategic environmental assessments that are now sitting on the table. And strategic environment assessment is a very, very important approach to planning, because it investigates what the environment can support in the way of development, as opposed to an EIA is what's the impact of that activity on the environment. Completely different thinking. We have to consider in planning, what are the drivers in the landscape? And the drivers in the landscape are multiple. We've got climate change. We're sitting with El Nino now. They're forecasting La Nina next year. And once the rains come, people are going to forget about the drought. But there's nothing better than a crisis to focus the mind. Poverty, it resonates in our landscape. Degradation and fragmentation is taking place because of the impact of poverty. Uncoordinated development is taking place across our landscape. And wildlife crime is undermining it. And then the communities, having to make sure that we can enhance the benefit flow to them and that they have greater and greater say into how we engage with them and how they engage. Land use planning really needs, and it seeks basically a convergence of three disparate and potentially diverging issues as we chart a green growth for KAZA. And I'm going to pull out these three, which are obviously wildlife focused. It's wildlife abundance and distribution. We've heard about the elephant story and the elephant in the room. We'll talk about wildlife connectivity within and between KAZA partner states. And then what are the barriers and impediments to this connectivity? When we look at wildlife numbers, their distribution, and what's out there, the outputs from the KAZA-wide survey is critically important. We've come out with a number that's based on very good science, and what it shows us in this regard is that the elephants are being more and more contained by an expanding livestock population and human footprint. You'll see that the human footprint in the red dots is indicative of how that's expanding. The black dots are what the livestock are doing in the landscape. And the elephant, as in blue in that landscape, is showing where they're confined. So really what we're seeing is these elephants, which are our milk cows, where KAZA has an unprecedented advantage with over 50% of Africa's elephants, we should be exploiting that even more. And we've heard some ideas around that. At the same time, when you combine all the information from that aerial survey that looked at large herbivores, as well as livestock and elephants combined, you can see the separation. Really, where you start getting livestock, you do not get wildlife. So we got the separation, and we have to plan accordingly if we want to make the best of this asset, which is Africa's asset, and the world craves it. At the same time, we have to take cognizance of ecological connectivity. Connectivity is not restricted to wildlife. It's also social, it's ecological, it's political, and KAZA's ticking lots of those boxes. But what you can look at here, the outputs from a lot of the analysis that Anna mentioned earlier, was on the radio track movement of elephants. It identified hotspots of elephant movement. You can see in area A there are the micro corridors that she referred to that are incredibly important for elephants to run down to the Kavango, literally run down, drink, and get out and go back into the landscape. And B, elephants are pushed on an east-west movement because of veterinary fences. In areas C and D, elephants are confined by human activities and land use development in those parcels. What you see in D is possibly the most important corridor within the Zambezi region in Namibia. Is called the Sobi Corridor, and it links the Zambezi Forest Reserve with Siamangwezi in Zambia right down into the Maduma complex. Critically important. But you can look at other areas. You can look at the Zambezi, where the elephants are not crossing the Zambezi to a large degree. You can see Livingston down there as a red dot where elephants are moving in. So connectivity is critically important. We have to understand where these pinch points are when one plans. Let's move on to other forms of connectivity. Water. Water in this dry landscape is critically important. And what you look at in the KAZA landscape, you've got 3 rivers. Only 3 permanent river sources. Outside of the summer's rainy season, we've got virtually no surface water in the rest of KAZA outside of that. So you can see the increase in human conflict that will potentially take place with wildlife around those water resources. This map is a product from a systematic conservation plan for the Kwanda River Basin, which is identifying the priority conservation areas in the Kwanda River Basin, part of that SCA that I mentioned to you. What's it identified is the entire river length of Kwanda is critically important as an ecological process. and we have to conserve it. Looking at Kwanda, which is the smallest of the three rivers, it's so important in many ways because this river is one of the least impacted rivers on the African continent. It is a jewel in KAZA's crown, but it also provides one of the major elephant highways for elephant connectivity between the elephant abundant areas in Botswana through to the elephant depauperate areas in Angola and Zambia. Climate change. The prognosis for climate change is quite dismal. This is also based upon predicted rainfall and temperature and the impact on the Kwanda River and what it's expected to do. And it's using 3 climate scenarios. And those scenarios are based upon a 2.7% increase in warming, a 3.6 or a 4.4. A lot of us complained how hot it was this year, and it was very hot by comparison. The prognosis is we're going to move into the 3.4 to 4.4 temperature increase based upon carbon emissions. What we will see over time is a reduction in the flow of the Kwanda. That's not including abstraction for human use and other use. So what we can see, the Kwanda will be reducing its flow potentially by 50% over the time period indicated here. The prognosis is probably the same for the Kavango and Zambezi. So this talks a lot about what the development capability of that landscape is and how we need to address it. Land use change. Land use change is critically important and is taking place at a rapid rate in KAZA. This is drawing upon some old data that comes out of the Sabungwe in Zimbabwe. From 73 to 93, in that 20 years, you can see the expansion of the human footprint into the Sabungwe area. And as you can see, that pressure is immense. And between then and now, it's increased even more so, increasing a lot of pressure onto those protected areas, Chitzerira, Matusadana, and the likes of that. When we get to looking at Zambezi region, this is an indication of the increase in villages in the period of 2013 to 2019 in Zambezi region in Namibia. When you look at the Zambezi region, it's actually a key that goes to the heart of KAZA. It really is shaped as a key, and it goes to the heart of KAZA. When you put development in place and you put in roads, people follow. That's natural, because it's a form of communication, and it also indicates here that we need to be looking in the context of urban development. Should we be encouraging attractive urban areas to reduce the pressure on the rural environment, which is really what we are trying to harvest in the KAZA landscape? Other barriers that we see before us now are things such as veterinary fences. This is an indication of the movement of buffalo within the Bobota National Park and the Maduma landscape. As you can see, veterinary fences play an incredible role in restricting movements. I could have shown something similar for elephants. At the same time, this is an opportunity for the veterinary services between Namibia and Botswana that are talking about how can we find common vision. How can we find common vision to help them deliver on the livestock objectives that they have and that the conservationists have for their wildlife and to exploit them. And this is where it opens doors for commodity-based trading and the herding for health programs as a way of trying to separate livestock from wildlife so that we can actually have some form of common vision, which is one of the questions that were asked earlier. So when we look at an integrated land use planning, it's a key component if we want to have a green growth in KAZA. But there's certain points we have to consider. One is we have to be integrated in our approach in planning. That means including the veterinary services, the Ministry of Finance, landscape planning, Department of Agriculture, mining, as well as you as environmentalists that are sitting in here. We have to have them around the table so we understand what they're doing, because they are the ministries that really influence things that take place. We need cross-sectoral involvement, as I've mentioned. It's critically important. It was raised yesterday. What scale do we plan at? Do we plan at the national level? Do we plan at the local level? Or do we plan at the wildlife dispersal areas, which is one of the recommended areas of focus in KAZA? I'm suggesting that we probably think at wildlife dispersal areas, because it forces us to think transboundary, so that what you're doing in one country, you're cognizant of what's happening next door in the other country. It has to be underpinned by good science. The aerial survey work was a reflection of good science. The radio tracking work that's been undertaken is a reflection of good science and how we can use that information. And there's more. We also have to make sure there's a legal mandate for the IDPs. Otherwise, it's nothing more than planning in a vacuum, and it's a gentleman's agreement. And there's no commitment to deliver on it. Unless you follow it up with budgetary allocations towards that landscape and what you're trying to do, you're not going to get that commitment. So we have to try and make sure that we get that in place. Robust business planning has to be part and parcel of any form of IDP and planning. Otherwise, if you don't have the numbers there and the dollars to support, it's again planning in a vacuum. Partnerships and technical collaboration is critical. And as we've heard, the partnerships have been developed over this time in the SADC, and KAZA, as a convening platform, provides that direct avenue by which these partners can collaborate. And innovation, we must look at innovative ways right across the planning regimes that we try and propose. As a way of summary, I'd like to say that conservation development needs to be politically possible, socially acceptable, institutionally robust, economically and financially viable, and technically feasible and ecologically sustainable. It's not, but hell, we've got to give it a go if we want to have an impact in KAZA. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Mike, for that presentation. And it's good that you stuck to the time given. From that presentation, a few key elements that have to be considered have been highlighted. And before I call upon the panelists, I just want to remind you, Mike, that when the panelists have finished their presentations, I would like you to come and join us in front so that during the plenary session you'll be part of this discussion. Before I call upon the panelists, I would like to bring two important considerations to the panelists to consider before they come up front. They must reflect on the specific themes that have been given to them, because we are relying on them to bring up those issues within the framework of those themes. Secondly, that they should also respond effectively to the questions that will arise after that presentations. I also think that I'd like to just briefly highlight the themes that will be part of this session. Community-based natural resources management is one of the key themes highlighted in this session. The benefit sharing and human-wildlife coexistence. The water resources, managing zoonotic diseases and diseases of economic importance, corridors, and wildlife dispersal areas. These are some of the themes that we expect the panelists to address themselves to. So at this stage, let me invite the panelists to come up front. Ms. Lewis from Naxom, Namibia. Please, you can take your seat. And Professor Lupetu. Dr. Ngombwa. and not the least, Mr. Samson Chibaya. Okay, so the discussion will follow pretty much the order of the, to be careful with the time. Each of the panelists have a maximum of 12 minutes. So you have the floor, Madam Lois.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And thanks for the opportunity for Namibia to share their experiences in terms of a program that we have implemented over 30 years. And I also at the same time want to declare that CBNRM is a Southern African program, and that Namibia actually learned from a lot of the countries that are in KAZA in the earlier years, in the earlier formative stages of implementing CBNRM. We learned from Campfire, we learned from Botswana, and then we learned from our brothers in Zambia, our brothers and sisters in Zambia. So it's a program then that over the years that we made our own in terms of its implementation. So in terms of sharing some of the experiences, let me start by saying that CBNRM in Namibia is very much based on a rights approach. It's a program then that we use to make sure that we use our community's traditional knowledge systems, but also make sure that they benefit from these resources that we call natural resources. That includes wildlife, because we started very much as a wildlife program, and then we moved into forests, water, and we continue integrating other natural resources as we go. That also includes participation. We put communities at the center of everything that we do in Namibia. So that is something that is very critical in the way we implement our community-based natural resource program. Livelihoods is very key in terms of what we do. And I will also just then share that is also governed by a legislative framework. So we work very closely with our government. Partnership is very key in the way we implement our program. So we have a policy to make sure that this right that I just talked about is something that the communities have power or are empowered to be able to implement the program. We work very closely with our colleagues that are here from the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Tourism, and that's how we based our partnership in terms of the way we go about implementing CBNRM. So who are we in terms of talking about CBNRM in our own context? It's our communal conservancies. You heard about conservancies, and there is a linkage in terms of the Zambezi region. I was just the other day listening, around 22 conservancies. Most of them actually come from Namibia in terms of that contribution to KAZA. We also have community forests, and then we have our fisheries reserves that form part of what we call CBNRM. We also have other partnerships that I will talk about later on that are outside and external in terms of trying to make sure that our communities' voices are also heard beyond Namibia and in the region, and not just in country itself. Just to share some of the numbers that we have in terms of these conservancies, we have around 87 of them. 2 of them are in national parks. The Babwata National Park that Mike just showed on the map is a big contributor in terms of the work that we do with those communities that are living in the park. And then we have one community that is on the coastal areas that also in a national park. We have around 46, and there could be more because this is data that I have from 2022. We do collect data and sometimes it's a bit late. But as far as I know, from 2022, we have around 46 community forests, around 20 community fisheries reserves, probably could be a little bit more by now. And then we have what we call tourism concessions. 19 of these concessions, concessions that are in national parks, and we have around 23 conservancies that share some of these concessions. So these concessions could be tourism concessions, because that's where most of our incomes come from, and also come from what we call conservation hunting, so it comes from hunting. We are very proud that we having communities that actually look after these resources, and we have what we call community game guards, around plus minus around 700 or more of them that actually work within these conservancy institutional frameworks to make sure that they look after the resources. And then I actually want to mention that because hunting forms very critical part of the diversification of income to our conservancies, that we have around 44 conservation hunting concessions or contracts. I also just want to share, because I need to share what we think can be a lesson learned in Namibia. Governance is very key. We have very localized, organized governance systems from a local level, where you have conservancies having committees, or CBOs, as we know in Southern Africa, organizing themselves, to levels of, at a regional level, where we have regional associations. And learning from Campfire and from the Zambian Forum, we are now in a couple of weeks going to launch what we call our Community Conservancy and Community Forest Association. So that's a national association that we are going to form. Also, other issues that are very important to us is compliance. We make sure that these institutions are not there by themselves, but they comply, because they have to follow some legal framework in being accountable, not just to their members, but also to the institutions that they that actually created that enabling environment for them to operate. So they need to have their annual general meetings. We talked about yesterday, finances is a big one. The issue of financial mismanagement is something that is a big challenge with us that we need to address, and we are trying to address that. And then issues of just making sure that there is implementation and enforcement in terms of the management plans, whether it's at the level of the conservancies or also at other levels, new institutional CBOs that are coming up, like forestry and fisheries and so forth. We are very we are very serious in terms of gender participation. So women are very key in these institutional mechanisms. We make sure that there is a strong representation of women because they are very close in terms of natural resources. So we make sure they are part of the decision making. We have the youth, especially in the area of Zambezi, trying to make sure that our youth form part of the leadership when it comes to CBNRM. That's something that we also invest, working very closely with our universities, trying to mentor the future in terms of CBNRM, making sure that they fill that gap when some of us have gone. We live by the motto of we need to adapt and manage our resources in an adaptive manner. So data and monitoring and evaluation is very key in terms of what we do. And one of the biggest achievements that I saw yesterday is that KAZA is trying to implement SMART. And SMART now is also being introduced to our conservancies. We have already started doing that, for instance, with our rangers that work with rhinos, our outside parks. And so we are working very close to make sure our community conservancies are also up to date in terms of making sure we are in par with technology. So that's what we are trying to do. Human-wildlife conflict, the elephant in the room has been there, will continue to be there. In Namibia, we have developed policies, and thanks to our government, we continuously try and review these policies, making sure that we have inputs from our communities, making sure that this issue is being taken seriously. So as a result, we have an insurance scheme that we call it's an offset of human-wildlife conflict losses that we are experiencing in Namibia. It's not perfect, but at least it helps to make sure that communities believe that they can get some, they can get something for their losses. So it's something that I think we piloted, and we continue to see if it's working, looking at other avenues, how we can maybe perfect it. Wildlife crime, we are involved in a lot of the wildlife crime activities. Our conservancies are key. Our wildlife guards, or what we call community game guards, are part of that. Yesterday or the day before, the Parks Director mentioned that one of the biggest challenges that we have in terms of CBNRM, because a lot of our programs are very much donor-funded programs, the issue of sustainability is very key. In Namibia, that's a discussion that we had over years, maybe over 10 or 12 years, looking at, how do we address issues around sustainability? And I'm very happy to say that we have started, and we are trying to set up a conservation or community conservation trust fund that actually addresses a lot of issues, especially service provision coming from services that are provided by organizations such as ours, but also long-term looking at the sustainability of our conservancies. So we are very keen in terms of addressing some of those livelihoods. Maybe just to reflect a little bit in terms of the challenges, I think the challenges are challenges that are known, but I just want to emphasize that since Southern Africa has been really, really impacted over the years by drought. Namibia is one of those countries that are really going through a drought at the moment, a very bad one, to be honest. Water is so scarce now. It's not just for people, but also for wildlife, and that creates quite a lot of tension in terms of land use in conservancies. So the first thing for us that is very critical is to first make sure that there is food security. You cannot work with people that are hungry. And so that's why we really need to start looking at what is important going forward in terms of addressing a lot of our issues. If conservation cannot pay for bread on people's tables, then people will do other land uses, and that becomes a threat in terms of our natural resources. So I think, Mr. Moderator, that's what I can share.
Thank you very much, Madam, for that presentation. And it was almost within the time frame, only just 1 minute above the time frame. So that was good. We move on to Professor Lupefum from University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And we are looking forward to hearing more from you with regards to water as a shared risk and opportunities for KAZA as a transboundary landscape, the implications for people and biodiversity. You have the floor.
Thank you, moderator, and good morning, all. I first would like to highlight the challenges, and I think some of them were already picked by the previous speaker, the speaker before her, about the challenges that talks to landscape management. And this also relates to challenges that are critical for shared water resources. Issues like infrastructure development, population increase, environmental degradation, pollution, and more than ever, the climate risks. This is a very critical one as impose issues of water scarcity, and that escalates the human-wildlife conflict that is an elephant in the room, as somebody said, because water as a resource both for domestic and also for wildlife. So the previous years we have been seeing mammoth changes in terms of the climate, and contextualizing this, especially in terms of Botswana, which is highly dependent on these shared rivers through the Kavango or Kavango River Basin and the Zambezi, Chobe. Most of the communities around the riverfront, be it in the Okavango Delta or the Chobe area, are dependent on these water resources for their livelihood. Because I want to contextualize this issue around the CBNRM and the community livelihood and moving forward opportunities that we can think about as KAZA and in terms of livelihood. We have seen a lot of community diversification, especially due to these challenges in terms of the climate change. Most of Botswana, I should believe, even last year, not just the area that I'm talking about, there was no crop farming. And that in itself is a very serious issue and a risk in terms of food security. So the riverine resource communities are dependent on some of the biodiversity that we find in the riverine, like the water lilies, fishing, the Molapo farming, which is the recession farming, but also selling the thatching of grass and reeds to the hotels. But not to forget about employment in terms of the tourism and the lodges and on other facilities that are providing tourism in the area. So this has brought about an issue of commercialization. That as well, it's a good thing for community diversification, but also it's a concern because it brings in the issue of monitoring. I was listening to the monitoring of biodiversity since yesterday, but I see a lot of it was talking to the elephants and to the wildlife. So moving forward as KAZA, we should also be bringing in biodiversity in terms of the plant resources, especially the resources in the riverine. I don't know if there's any research that has been towards that, but my concern as I saw the commercialization of the water lily, I think my colleagues from Botswana will agree to that. We call it SUI. It's now a health promoted resource, but also very expensive, which is good as a diversification. But the concern is then about the overexploitation. What data is there and what is the monitoring in terms of ensuring that there is sustainability in terms of this resource? And that's a take home that we should all look at and bring in researchers to also help us and understand this ecosystem. The other issues of fishing is also a very high commodity. That because of the change in diets, you find that people in the southern part of Botswana, I think also in most of the KAZA region, people are turning to eating white meat like fisheries. But the challenge now is in terms of the monitoring, to what extent are we able to look at what actually is there? And as we are promoting diversification and income generation, what is also critical is to have check and balances to ensure that there is a sustainability in terms of our resources. So moving forward with the issue of the conservancy, as he mentioned, we do have community trust. And I was happy yesterday, I was listening to the Pax Foundation, that communities can also be empowered to be doing the monitoring, to even go into using technology to be able to provide this data. And it came to me to realize that we have our youth. And most of the time talking about inclusivity, do we have the youth also being part and parcel of these forums? Because they are part of the community. And what I realize about the youth is that they are very technologically savvy. They are very interested in using technology, the artificial intelligence, to be able to generate this data. And therefore, we should not leave them behind. And that will also help in terms of this rural-urban migration. So that's another component that we can bring in to include the youth so that they help us in this monitoring. They are able to use drones, and that's exciting for them, to be able to provide us with data that we need for monitoring purposes, as we talked about these resources, this biodiversity, and this conservation in our shared resources. But another opportunity I see in terms of this landscape conservation, especially the watershed resources, is the opportunity that exists in the carbon credit trading. I just attended an AGNES forum, which is the Africa Group of Negotiators, and I was able to hear from the coastal communities, the mangrove zone, about the opportunity that they have found in this blue carbon. And what we have also learned is that the freshwater ecosystems actually absorb more carbon than the terrestrial. So climate change is a risk, but we can also see this opportunity that through these landscapes that we are able now to participate in this carbon credit trading. And I'm happy that one of our partners, Zambia, already has developed this framework for carbon credit trading. So it's very easy, and we can harness that and see how we are going to participate as an ecosystem payment services for our community. So that's a very good opportunity for us. And I think a lot has been talked about in terms of harmonization of policies. Botswana highlighted that they are working on harmonizing the fishing regulations so that Botswana and Namibia, whatever conflict was escalated by this fishing now will be abated. So I think those are some of the opportunities that I foresee in terms of the shared resources. Thank you, the moderator. I think I'll stop so far.
Thanks a lot, Prof, for staying within the time frame, and also for the reminder about the need to empower communities and embracing the youth as well. And of course, on the opportunities on the carbon credit trading and all that. I think we'll move straight to Doc. You can pick up the floor. And just to remind the Doc that we are looking forward to hearing from you the importance of managing zoonotic diseases and diseases of economic importance, and to share experiences from KAZA. You have the floor, Doc.
Thank you so much, moderator. Good morning, everybody. Regarding the management of zoonotic diseases and diseases of national importance and how that is important, I'll start with the diseases. I'll start with the zoonotic diseases. First and foremost, we need to realize that for us to have actually got meaningful utilization of the wildlife in the KAZA landscape, we need to grow the population. So to grow this population, we need to have a very healthy and breeding population that is going to grow. This is going to enhance the tourism and also the visibility of the landscape. Now, if we talk about making the KAZA area as a one-stop tourism destination, and if we're not managing these diseases, particularly the zoonotic diseases, for example, trypanosomiasis, if the area is known to be, endemic, or say maybe the trypanosomiasis is not being managed, tourists are going to be afraid to visit, such a place. Another zoonotic that we can talk about in terms of tourism is a disease, like brucellosis, the famous undulating fever disease. And then we also have, tuberculosis. If at all the tourists will have to get into contact or partake some of the products that will come from the species that we're keeping. So it is actually very important that we look at the aspect of zoonotic diseases and manage them. Then coming to the context of diseases of national importance. Of particular importance within the KAZA landscape, we have got the FMD, which worldwide is actually considered to be the #1 disease of national importance. This is a debilitating disease which affects the economy when you're managing livestock, and it also just affects production. So, yesterday the chair and everybody else has been mentioning about how the communities will have to, benefit from the, the conservation efforts. So if the beneficiation of the community is increased, then definitely, obviously also the livestock aspect, the investment will have to increase. But if the health is not being managed, then all the efforts are going to be, futile. So that's one of the reasons why we need to manage FMD. Secondly, we also know that we have, a population of over 75,000 buffaloes within the KAZA landscape, which, sometimes can actually be a carrier of thyroidosis and can also be, a carrier of, by the way, thyroidosis is also called a corridor, and it comes because, buffaloes sometimes can be migratory. And so if we do not manage that interface between, the wild animals and also the livestock, then we are going to have this ravaging disease, especially in our livestock, and the economy of the, the community is not going to improve. Everybody else has been talking about the experiences we're having, particularly, recently, to do with climate change, and how that now we are, competing, for the landscape uses, particularly water points, and also, encroachment, habitat reduction, and all that. So the interface is actually increasing. We have, experienced cases of anthrax in the past. We have had cases, of the contagious bovine pleural pneumonia disease, CBPP, within Zambia. And we also have, among our celebrated species, which is the wildebeest, and sometimes it can actually carry, the bovine catarrh fever, which, the wildebeest itself can actually be a carrier, and the livestock, can really be negatively impacted. So it is, based on some of those reasons I've just mentioned, that we, invest highly, particularly from the KAZA perspective, in managing these diseases. Anthrax, if we do not say sensitize, many are the times that by the time we are getting to know that there's actually an outbreak of anthrax, it's from the reports that people consumed, carcasses that they found, hippos, we've had such experiences in Zambia. So we need to particularly invest in the prevention efforts, sensitization, surveillance, so that we get this right, so that our populations of wildlife can grow, our populations of livestock within the communities can grow. If the populations of livestock do not increase, then the end result is going to be that the community will resolve to, sourcing their source of protein from the wildlife, and that is going to impact our tourism negatively. Basically, I can only maybe mention one or two things that the KAZA Animal Health Working Group is doing just to mitigate some of those impacts of diseases, and also to enhance prevention. So I think there's been regular consultative meetings held among KAZA partner states to look at how well we can manage these diseases. Then we're also taking a multi-sectoral approach. Within Zambia, we work closely with the Ministry of Livestock and Fisheries, particularly the Department of Veterinary Services. Within the Department of National Parks, we also have a dedicated team of veterinary experts, looking at all those aspects of surveillance and how we can sensitize the communities. Then there's also been the approach by KAZA to harmonize certain legislation, policies, so that, we come up with a framework that can work. Moderator, I think with those words, that's what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc, for your presentation and for sticking to the time frame. And also for the reminder about the need to manage these diseases and the investment in the prevention. At this stage, I think we move to Mr. Chivaya. And just a reminder is that we are looking forward to you to highlight issues on managing contiguous wildlife populations, the importance of communities, wildlife corridors, and the dispersal areas. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, moderator. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I will touch on the issues to do with the wildlife dispersal areas, particularly with reference to Zimbabwe. Yesterday, I think there's been a lot of discussions around the wildlife dispersal areas, of which 6 were identified in the previous presentations that were made. And of the 6, Zimbabwe is part to 3 of them. That is the Zambezi Msiatunya Wildlife Dispersal Area, the Wange Kazumachove Wildlife Dispersal Area. We also have the Wange Mahatpeni Wildlife Dispersal Areas. But before I also go further, I would also want to indicate that according to the KAZA scenario or setup, these areas, as identified as wildlife dispersal areas, that they cover a portion of the Zimbabwe KAZA component, but not necessarily meaning to say that there are no other wildlife dispersal areas within the Zimbabwe KAZA component. The area stretches to as far as Kariba, whereby in terms of our elephant range areas, there are basically 3: the Northwest Matabeleland area, the Sebongwe elephant range area, and also the mid-Zambezi elephant range areas. So just to zero much on these wildlife dispersal areas, you would notice that they are quite a mosaic kind of a landscape, which constitute different areas with wildlife under different, in terms of institutional and governance approach. Some of the areas they are under the Parks Protected Area, Forest Commission. We also have the conservancies. We also have the community-based areas which are under the campfire program. So there are so many programs that have happened within these dispersal areas which have managed to sustain these dispersal areas, and these also include issues to do with law enforcement, which I think is quite very key in terms of securing those wildlife dispersal areas. Then you also have technical and financial support from KAZA and also partners, but of importance are the community projects that are happening within these wildlife dispersal areas, so that we win the support in the minds of these communities. In most of these programs, you would see that they fit quite very well in terms of the pillars that we discussed yesterday to do with natural resources management, land use planning, and also tourism development, as well as community developments. But looking at the importance of these communities, to see why are we saying communities are quite very key, I think the discussions have been centering around community benefits, so that they develop a positive mind towards wildlife. Each time they see wildlife, they mustn't see wildlife as an enemy to them, but also as playing a value, because they are at the center, or they are the first line of defense as far as protecting of these natural resources. But what is very important as we think around coming up with the strategies and frameworks on how communities can also be part of this, is to look at how do we then categorize in terms of the various levels of these communities, because we do see that communities are made up of different people and with a diverse kind of culture. So I think it is quite very key and important that we also see communities of like-minded, or forming up with the communities of partners, so that we address issues that are based on cultural interests, norms, and values. I would also want to look at what could be some of the driving factors that affect the coexistence between wildlife and the communities within the wildlife dispersal areas. The issue of climate change, I think, is quite very key. It has been discussed extensively from the previous speakers, which have seen persistent droughts affecting our elephants. In the case of Zimbabwe, I would also want to bring to the attention that part of the KAZA area, which is the Wange mainly, which also houses the highest population of elephants in Zimbabwe, is dominated by the Kalahari, and much of the water being provided in the Wange National Park is through artificial game water supply. Currently, we have got over 150 bores that are used to supply water to the animals. So the issue of research then becomes key in terms of determining how far can we go in terms of probably having more. Do we need additional more bores, or we need to maintain the ones which we currently have? And also there is need for research to also understand in terms of the abstraction of the water. So it is then also important to make sure that whatever extraction of the water from underground is also research-based and also informed. There are also other driving factors like human population increase. Yesterday, there was also a talk to say the human population is also increasing within these wildlife dispersal areas, as well as the animal population. And there is also need to then look at how best can we promote safe passage within these corridors. Then the issue of programs that are also coming within these wildlife dispersal areas. In Zimbabwe, we've got also other programs like dams which are being constructed currently. Our Gwaishangani Dam, which is within the Wange landscape, is almost complete, and that has got a bearing in terms of influencing animal movement in that area. Then that also calls for probably a review or a validation of these current identified wildlife dispersal areas as influenced by these new developments which are happening within the areas. Then there's also the issue of the lack of tangible benefits which are realized. This is just an emphasis to the observations that have already been made in the previous discussion, to say communities are saying they are not realizing much benefit. I talked of the campfire program, which is also, but the benefits are still not yet enough. From the Zimbabwean side, the government has also taken a stance to review the Parks and Wildlife Act, which is the major regulatory piece of legislation which regulates the utilization of wildlife in Zimbabwe. The whole idea is to try and make sure that there is focus towards community beneficiation from the resources that they live with. I also want to touch in terms of some of the interventions that we think could be ideal, and some of them that are already being implemented. The issue of promoting cohabitat should be a prerequisite as we look at coming up with a stable and viable elephant population, and this can be enhanced by promoting those identified corridors. Research has also pointed that there are quite a lot of corridors that have been identified. We've got elephants that have been collared across the KAZA landscape within Zimbabwe, and information which is available indicates that there are so many movements in between the wildlife dispersal and also in between those elephant range areas. Elephants that have been collared, some of them they've moved quite for some long distances, and in between protected areas, and most of them they are getting into the communities to an extent that some of them they've also caused some injuries to the people, but some of them they've also been driven back to the protected area. Currently, last year, comparing figures in terms of people who have been injured by the elephants, last year we had 11 people injured, and this year already we are already sitting on 11. Then last year we also lost a couple. This year I'm sure the figures that I've seen, about 8 have been lost. So you see the impact that is caused by the elephant movement, not only elephant in terms of human-wildlife conflict as far as killing is concerned. We've also seen of late that crocodiles are also becoming a problem, especially in the areas where we have got water bodies in terms of interaction between human and wildlife. But what is also key in terms of development, in terms of interventions, is education. It is important that our communities are well educated in terms of awareness campaigns so that they protect these wildlife dispersal areas. Then the issue of development partners. We have seen in Zimbabwe that development partners, they've come in very, very much hand within the KAZA landscape. There's been so much development that we have noticed, so much improvement in terms of protection, so much improvement in terms of innovation by bringing in new technology as far as monitoring is concerned. So there is need to promote involvement of partners within these landscapes. Then strengthening law enforcement to secure these corridors is also very, very much key and important. Then continuous research to inform in terms of decision making is also key. Then what we've also been adopting in Zimbabwe is we've adopted the use of predator-proof bombers to secure the livestock from being killed by lions. We've seen them working. Then also awareness campaigns. We have been working with various institutions like forestry, RDC, rural district councils. It is also important to note that from the Zimbabwean approach or Zimbabwean side, most of the rural district authorities, they've been given what we call the appropriate authority status, which gives them then the power to be responsible in wildlife which exists within their areas of authority, which has been very, very much key. Then collaring of elephants. We have seen quite a number of elephants that have been collared across the landscape, and this has informed us quite a lot in terms of identifying the active corridors so that the appropriate measures can be taken. Then the capture and translocate is also one of those options that we have been doing. We've captured some animals, especially predators, and then they released them back in the park. Then we have also seen technical support and the financial support from KAZA and also in-country partners. So in conclusion, as I conclude, I think it is quite very important and also key to say there's been a lot of discussion around community beneficiation. Now, what can we do? I think there's been a talk over time, and it should be high time that we turn all these recommendations into action plans so that people can start to see how exactly communities are benefiting from the natural resources that exist within their areas. Thank you so much, Moderator.
Thanks a lot, Samson. You only went above the time limit by 2 minutes, so that was not too bad. One of the moderators referred to his panelists as unbalanced, and I would like to refer to my panelists as balanced. And I would like to give a round of applause to the panelists for the presentations that they have given. We are now on the third component of the session, and as I had suggested, Mike, you can join us, and the distinguished delegates, you have the opportunity to bring some questions to the panelists and the presenter, and some submissions that you might have following these wonderful presentations and discussions from the panelists. So the floor is open to the distinguished delegates. We have 2 hands this side and here. And I think what we are going to do is we'll take those 3 questions and then give chance to the presenter and the panelists, and then we move to the next. Oh, we can take 4, maybe. Let's take the fourth one, and then we move on.
Thank you. Can you start? I can start.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Mine is not a question, but just an effort to augment the submission on disease control. I speak to you now not as a SADC, not as a peace person, representative, but as someone that has been involved in animal disease control in the region as a member of SADC. I have been a member of the Animal Health Sub-Working Group since inception. And we have done quite a number of strides. We've made a number of strides in terms of development. We have looked at the issues of fences in the KAZA region. You know the effect that fences, animal fences, have on connectivity. So it is just last year we met in Divundu with directors of veterinary services and animal production, and of course including the units of wildlife that deals with disease control. And therein we discussed a number of issues, including the falling of fences in the KAZA region. Are these fences that were put up way back still as valid and as effective as they were those days? So these are the issues that we looked at. We even had excursions. We went to where the fences were. We visited a number of fences to learn from the communities on how effective these fences were. We came up with a number of resolutions. Among them was the reviewing of these fences. Our decisions have to be science-based, and therefore we have to carry out research. A task team was put together to actually look at the efficiency and effectiveness of these fences. Next week, I think on the 10th, we are meeting here in Livingstone. All directors of veterinary services and animal production, including the wildlife department, will meet here in Livingstone and still go to another area where there are fences also in Zambia, cordon lines. Yeah? But also as a follow-up to the decisions that we made that time. Among the resolutions that we made also at that time, at the last meeting, was joint planning of veterinary disease controls of some of these transboundary diseases, foot and mouth disease, CBPP, which is contagious bovine pleural pneumonia, which ravages, these diseases ravage our area, our regions, year in, year out. We are faced with the same problems. Why? We said, if Namibia is vaccinating on their side, on the border with Angola, Angola should do the same. We have to look at those possibilities. If Zambia is vaccinating on their side, Zimbabwe should do the same, so that we cut that transboundary component of the disease spread. So these are the issues. We are not just seated. We are working on them, slowly but sure, but we are moving. I think this is what I wanted to bring to this meeting. Moderator, anthrax this year with the drought that we're talking about is bound to hit us hard. Anthrax spread or is picked by livestock or animals, even wild animals, including hippos and so on, as you know. As they graze low, there will be no enough feed in the region. There will be no enough grazing in the region. And therefore, as they feed, as the animals feed, they'll be picking spores. They'll be picking anthrax spores. And therefore, we should expect this year a lot of anthrax cases. So really, we are meeting next week or on the 10th or 11th and 12th to discuss all these matters. So we are covered as disease control experts. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Prof. We go to the next.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mine is also not a question, but just to compliment my colleague from Botswana on the topic of water as a shared risk, and also to some extent the disease control. I think from yesterday and today we talked about commercial development in the KAZA area, which is good to improve community livelihoods and also alleviate poverty. But I think equally important, we should talk about the fact that if you commercialize development in the area, that calls for improvement in agriculture production, infrastructure development, especially the tourism enterprises. So the issue of pollution as one of the 3 planetary crises facing the planet Earth, we should talk about sustainable development to avoid those, the pollution emanating from those development. And then the other thing is the Africa region, which KAZA is not an exception, still use DDT to eradicate malaria. And DDT is listed for elimination under the Stockholm Convention on persistent organic pollutants, because it is a chemical which is helping us to eradicate malaria in the region. But the bad side of it is that it is continuously being deposited and breaking into its metabolites, which is DDE, and is very bad because it interferes with the reproductive cycle of birds of prey. And it takes calcium from the eggshells, and when they incubate the eggs simply breaks, reducing the population of birds of prey. So these are the things that, you know, when we look at the component of pollution in the region, we should focus our effort on that. The last thing is that Botswana, as an effort to maintain the integrity of our wetland resources, under KAZA, did a project on automated water quality monitoring for the Kavango, Chobe rivers. And then the project is also extended to the Limpopo River Basin, as my colleague in the first day has alluded to. I think, you know, this project is not only supposed to be done in the Botswana area. I think, you know, KAZA should duplicate this project to all the affected countries so that we monitor the water quality of our wetland resources so that we are able to pick anything that is undesirable, maybe through our adjacent development in the riverine strips, so that, you know, we are able to eliminate the source of pollution. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator.
We move to the next question, and then after that, another question. Then we give chance to the presenter and the panelists.
Thank you, moderator. Yeah, I'll contribute my capacity as a natural resource expert. Moderator, I want to refer especially to Mike's presentation. Integrated land use plans, as we even discussed yesterday, one of the biggest problems is enforceability. We make very nice rosy plans, especially as ecologists, that usually sit as sitting ducks on our desks, largely because of enforceability is a question. I was just wondering, in the process that we are using as KAZA, if we are considering how we have these plans to be enforceable. In the case of Zambia, for instance, we have the Town and Country Planning Act, and that is one of the best places
where we could seed an integrated land use plan as compared to other plans, so that it gives us that power to have those plans enforced. Because if I'm not mistaken, integrated land use plan developed under the Town Country Planning Act is signed off by the minister responsible for town and country planning, but it provides for us to have input from other stakeholders. Of course, the challenge we have with our country planning authority is largely that mostly architects and very little multidisciplinary input in there. However, we need to work with them in a way that ecologists, whatever, planners, everyone buys into that plan, so that we have that power to be enforced. The other aspect of the process which maybe we would want to see is how do we loop in political buy-in, so that these plans have got the blessing and political direction, so that as they can be used at all levels and acceptable. Because if there is a divergence between the conservation plans and political buy-in, we have that problem. One of Mike's presentation, he mentioned 3 key ingredients. I was worried because all of the 3 were ordered. And then I'm looking at our theme as inclusiveness in it. But I was comforted that he went ahead and submitted other ingredients that are needed for a land use plan, incorporating other developments. And that's maybe the language we also need to use as conservationists that would be acceptable at all levels than ourselves as we deal with the plan. So basically my contribution is to do with enforcement of these plans, as well as ensuring that we have enough political will and buy-in to enforce these plans. Otherwise, they remain sitting ducks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can have one more, and then we give the floor to the presenter and the panelists. I see that we are done with the submission. Oh, one more. Yeah, Executive Director.
Okay. Now, thank you very much, moderator and the panelists. And just to give a statement regarding the significance of connectivity across the landscape and the opportunities which are associated with that. Allow me, senior officials, to actually just update on some of the critical steps that your Animal Health Sub-Working Group and also the Conservation Working Group have been advancing over the last few years using their multi-year action plan. Last year, as an example, in Botswana, an assessment was undertaken to look at the veterinary fence and to learn on what possibilities exist, and also to learn about the linkages to livelihoods, and most importantly also the effectiveness of disease control. Then there is also a very important issue related to this, related to disease risk assessment. We are currently in a 3rd phase. The first part that I spoke about is actually part of an ongoing disease risk assessment, because like the panelist mentioned, that is a major risk to tourism, it's a major risk to health, and also a major risk to livelihoods. And suffice to mention that also working with different players, we are promoting initiatives at a pilot stage around commodity-based trading. And this is an innovative mechanism. We're working with FAO and the World Organization on Animal Health in recognition of the need for us to promote the coexistence agenda. Adding to all this, and very importantly, is the investments that are going on. Right now, the Republic of Namibia is in the process of building laboratories at Zambezi in Katimamulilo. And this work is part of the expansion of the University of Namibia, but we envisage the collaboration amongst the universities to actually take advantage of that state-of-the-art lab or labs that are going to be in Katimamulilo. And of course, working with an approved partner in the name of Victoria Falls Wildlife Trust. There's quite some work that is going on in the area of, again, disease risk management. So in conclusion, moderator, I just want to say that there is a very clear objective in the KAZA treaty that speaks to animal health and the risks this imposes on people, tourism, and the economies of the partner states. And associated with that is a very clear objective on the use of science in informing policy and legislation. Thank you.
We thank you very much for all the submissions that have come up. Some issues have come up with regards to disease control, some of the resolutions that have been made, and the need for joint planning for disease control, the issue of pollution, and the need for sustainable development and suggestions to broaden the scope of what was mentioned from Botswana. Then the integrated land use planning and the need to enforce the planning itself. And then, of course, from the statement that has been made on connectivity, and then the need for disease risk assessment, and all the efforts that have been made. So I'd like to give the floor to the panelists to respond to the issues that have come up and the questions and the reflections together with the presenter. You have the floor.
I don't think there was questions coming my way, but I just want to probably, in closing, just give my reflections. And when I look at KAZA, the landscape, apart from the national parks that we have, that is the driving force in terms of conservation activities in KAZA. The majority of the land use here is very much communal. And so I would like to really emphasize the need that the developments that are going on within KAZA should put people first. It's really important that we put people first. I do not see a KAZA development or a vision going forward without its people. And so it's already happening. I am really happy that I've seen so many development in trying to get especially people and communities involved as part of KAZA. But we would like to make sure that we improve, and especially when it comes to decision making, making sure that their voices are part of these technical discussions that we have here. And it doesn't matter. I remember a few years back we were in Victoria Falls, and I just want to quote what the communities were saying. We don't want to be we want to be shareholders. It doesn't matter whether it's conservation, it doesn't matter whether it's a commercial venture. We want to be shareholders. We just don't want to be called partners. And I think it's very important that we make sure that they are shareholders. Thank you.
So I think I'll give each of the panelists an opportunity to respond as we come to the conclusion and conclude with the presenter.
Thank you, moderator. I think mine was just a compliment to add to what I have already highlighted in terms of pollution control and monitoring that in our freshwater ecosystems, but also very critical, as my colleague said from Botswana, to really develop in a sustainable way. And it reminded me of one issue I encountered in Ngamiland, in Maung, when I was doing stakeholder engagement. We were looking at engaging stakeholders in terms of land restoration. And in that delta, they asked me, are you aware that even the number of many airstrips that are being built in the delta are a concern? You are talking to us about livestock, but have you looked at the development of the airstrips, the helicopter airstrips in the Kavango? And it was a wake-up call because I'm always having these meetings in Maung, but really, in terms of what is happening in the landscape, we don't know. So that was a homework, and that I need to maybe find time and really try to see what is happening in terms of this sustainable development. Because building airstrips, and if there are many of them, obviously they are taking a large chunk of land and impacting the ecosystem itself, like the Kavango delta. So that was a wake-up call for me to realize that indeed sustainable development is very important, and if it's not checked, can also be having an impact in terms of biodiversity in the ecosystem. But I also like to take this opportunity to thank SASCAL. We have a regional SASCAL supported by the German that has really been supporting these KAZA institutions, especially the universities, to do a lot of research around the area. So I forgot, but I realized that we do have an extension of that support, and I would really like to congratulate and to continue requesting other institutions to support us, especially the researchers. As the director has said, that policy is informed by science, and as researchers, that is very important for us. Thank you.
Yeah, we move on. Doc, can you pick it up?
Thank you so much, moderator. And I think likewise, mine was also not a question, but I think many statements have been given to augment what I presented, and I'm grateful for that. Also, maybe just to add on the aspect of commodity-based trade within the region, I think this can only be achieved if our disease status for the particularly livestock that our community members are keeping is okay, because it's the only way that they are going to actually eye for the markets with the right prices, like the EU. If our livestock is deemed diseased or contaminated, I think we will not be able to attend such markets. And then that also goes to the importance of the risk assessment in terms of disease that has also been brought up. I think yesterday there was a mention that due to proximity and also abundance, sometimes we are restocking most of our areas from our partner states, like in the case of the Siomangwezi National Park, and obviously other areas that need restocking we're getting from our prolific areas. But if the disease component is not thoroughly looked after, we might just be transmitting and translocating disease. So it is actually very important that we look at that seriously as KAZA, and also perhaps adopt the OIE guidelines, the international Organization for Animal Health, so that we have a healthy, thriving population of both wildlife and also the livestock, obviously for the social, economic benefit. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Doug. Samson, you can pick it up.
Thank you, moderator. I think for myself, I think the issue of securing the identified wildlife dispersal areas is quite very key, and this can only be done by engaging communities, because we noticed that a bigger portion of these wildlife dispersal areas is occupied by the communities, and as such they become so much key. So, and also the issue of maximizing on the indigenous knowledge system that is embedded within these communities is also very much important. Then the issue of climate change is one of the threats. I think it has come up so often, so there is need to come up where possible with the drought mitigation strategies in coming up with the possible interventions in addressing issues of persistence drought across the landscape. I submit.
Thanks a lot. And finally, Mike, if you can pick up the phone.
No, thank you very much. The gentleman over there, I think, answered his own question, but that's fine. My concluding remarks are, think transboundary. Maybe in that way we're looking at greater harmonization. That is happening. Include other influential ministries into our debate. And I would suggest also making sure that we can piggyback on other legislative means by which we can get our plans entrenched into the legal frameworks in the countries. And then plan bottom up, involving our communities, making it as inclusive as possible, as well as thinking on the top down. Thank you.
Yeah, at this stage, I would like to give thanks to the panelists and the presenter, and now give the floor to the director of program. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you very much, moderator, and a team of experts. I think our break has been long coming. We just need to have this break right now. And just like we did yesterday, ushers, please, may I ask that you come forward to lead the first, second, and third row. Chair, may I request that you lead the high table? So I think instead